on this computer. All right. So right as you were entering the waiting room, Lynn asked how, recognizing that the How to Write a Blackwood article came out before the fall of the House of Usher, how do we think that Poe understood his own writing, and how does it change how we understand Poe? Any thoughts?
I think in your lecture you talked about how he didn't mind writing to make money, to make a living off of it. So that it kind of makes me think that he maybe plays up the gothicness or the sentimentality of it to draw in that audience, to make them want to buy his material. So even though he kind of poked fun at it and talked about the ridiculousness of it a little bit, he's still gonna do it because it's entertaining and it sold his work.
Yeah. So Scott, the question on the table was posed by Lynn, and it's recognizing that Poe wrote How to Write a Blackwood article before his most famous Gothic short stories. How does that change how we think about Poe, and what might it tell us he thinks about his own work?
Oh, very interesting. I'll have to give that some thought before I give my response, but
And just so you know, we're recording just for another student who asked, who's not here. I just don't want you to be recorded without your knowledge.
cool. No worries. Thanks.
Any other thoughts on that?
I will say it changed my thinking of how Poe wrote between the lecture and the story, because I always kind of, I guess, romanticized his mental state and his drinking and his just everything into this kind of spooky Gothic writer. And so now it's just kind of more, I don't know, it made him more humanized to me, made him less fantastical.
Yeah. I think that's one of the really interesting things about Poe's biography is, and actually a lot of American writers from this time period. So in my lecture, I mentioned that the Poe Society publicizes Poe as being the first professional author. Like I said, I contradict that because Washington Irving made a living, and Washington Irving was such a celebrity that if he like went to a different town, it would be in the newspaper that he went there. Washington Irving wrote Rip Van Winkle, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, if that name's not ringing a bell. I think I might have mentioned him in our Hawthorne lecture, but anyway. So Poe is writing for money. He is often close to bankruptcy. A lot of his contemporaries have similar trouble. Mark Twain went bankrupt 3 times. So the idea of the starving artist is alive and well in American letters. But as I mentioned in my lecture, after Poe died, his enemy wrote this basically fake news obituary of him that are you guys familiar with the idea? There's a pithy phrase for it that might come to your mind, but is not coming to mind, about how like once a lie is out there, like you can't really retract it. So a recent example, this is a random example, but it was put out there that the person who was the Muppeteer for one of the Sesame Street characters sexually harassed people. And then it turned out that that wasn't true, but it's like some people saw the news, not everyone saw the retraction. A similar thing happens with Poe. So after Poe dies, he becomes this really romanticized author in his own right. All right, Scott, we'll see you in a second. Hopefully it'll work when you get back. So basically what Griswold did completely backfired. Like Griswold is trying to completely smear Poe's image. And what he ended up doing was turn him into this almost mythological writer character. And there are some elements of Poe's story that are mysterious and interesting, like unsolved cases of death are generally interesting to the American public. So there were elements there for Griswold to build on. But once we had this mystique, then you can't put it back in the box, basically. So how do you guys think, reading the How to Write a Blackwood article, Andrea said that humanized Poe for her. Did any of you have a different response to that?
I've never really I didn't know that he wrote funny things. I don't know. I always thought that he was kind of just a scary guy that I read. I have a very low tolerance for scary stuff, which is funny because I took Gothic thinking it'd be extra scary. Luckily, I can tolerate it. But I was laughing a lot when I was reading like the two accompanying pieces, and I never would picture those emotions with Poe. So completely, it really, for me, it broadened. It made me more impressed with his writing, because if he can do Usher, which is just creepy and dark and has all these really cool elements, but also still do humor like Blackwood and make me laugh, like I was actually more impressed with him. He seemed less of just a one trope kind of guy.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Lynn. It threw me off a bit of what I knew about Poe, and how it was much lighter than some other things that I've read by him, some poems and things. So it was definitely a contrast. And yeah, I agree that it made me think about his writing in just a new perspective.
So it's funny because when I first read Poe in high school, this was the second thing that I ever read. One of my professors showed me this. So we read The Raven, and then we read this. And then I went back and thought about The Raven, and I was like, oh, like I can see a lot of these elements like present in it. And then the next thing I read was A Telltale Heart, and I was like, oh, this like has those elements in it that are like, you know, kind of tongue in cheeky and you know, kind of cliche, and so I've always kind of looked at any of the Poe that I've read as like, you know, Poe not necessarily being this like ultra serious guy, like he's, you know, a creative in all senses of the word.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me because I have not met a student who encountered that these pieces earlier. So it's cool that you encountered them so early.
Yeah,
Natasha?
my 10th grade English professor was a big Poe fan, so he really got me into Poe, and so yeah, I've always been a big fan just purely because I could see the excitement that he put into his work.
Oh, that's awesome. Natasha, do you have any other thoughts on these questions?
I mean, like, I have to agree. I didn't expect Poe to be like funny at all. Like, I was like, is this supposed to be horrific or is it supposed to be ridiculous? So I was always like teetering between the two. And then when I read How to Write a Blackwood article, I felt like it showed like Poe's ability to be humorous, but I also wondered if it was showcasing like his ability to lend like a critical eye to the way maybe writers around him were writing, and that it was kind of a satire on like other writers around him that he's like critiquing and making fun of.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Mark Twain's James Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses. Are you guys familiar with that? Um, it's so funny. I'm gonna put the title in here because I don't want to waste your time by searching for it, but it's called James Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses. So James Fenimore Cooper was an American Romanticist writer. He wrote the Leatherstocking Tales, and they really romanticized the idea. Last of the Mohicans is the novel he's the most famous for. And that really romanticized the idea of the dying Native American, which was counter to portrayals of indigenous people as complete savages, but then also like lent to this idea that like all Native people are now dead, like Last of the Mohicans, and complete the erasure of people who are still today living and dealing with bad policy decisions from that time period. So Twain is coming on the scene a little bit later. You know, he's really rising to acclaim in like 1870. So he's a post-Civil War, still early-ish writer. But he is making fun of James Fenimore, the way James Fenimore Cooper specifically writes, but also the American Romantics in general. So some of the offenses are like, nothing adheres to gravity, like people can just jump forever. You could imagine the sorts of things that a realist would make fun of. So I actually think that Twain is building on Poe when he writes that, because it's a similar thing, even though Poe's not calling out someone specifically by name. I mentioned earlier Poe's being a professional writer, and so one of the things that happens as the profession of authorship is solidifying, is that presses and publishers become interested in marketing the writer as well as the work itself. So that happened a little bit with Poe during his life, of like, you know, the picture of him always looking sort of, every picture of him, he sort of has this like one eyebrow a little bit up, one eye is a little bigger than the other face. Nobody smiles really in pictures of that era, in professional pictures, because you had to sit still for a long time and a smile is hard to hold. So that's just an affordance of the technology. But anyway, publishers are interested in crafting an authorial persona. And so after this Griswold false obituary, when publishers start creating anthologies of the best of Poe's work, they're leaving some things out in order to build into that excitement about this spooky, mysterious guy. And then that's the inheritance that we get. So, you know, Poe wrote tons and tons of stuff. Because he's so famous, it's easy to find, because people have gone back and scanned, and you know, in a lot of cases they've made full text searchable things that he published in sort of small journals. But the real anthologized famous Poe, the way an author becomes famous is sort of what stays in print, what is selling, and that those are going to be his Gothic stories. And slowly you get this whittled down persona that, you know, maybe you know that Poe wrote some poems, that Poe thought about science a lot. Do you see Poe as an anti-progressive? Not that much. His short story, Some Words with a Mummy, from 1850, is like hilariously anti-progressive. I think I mentioned it in my lecture. Like they wake up a mummy with some electricity, and they're like, "Look, mummy, look what we have roads." And the mummy's like, "Well, in ancient Egypt we had aquifers and roads, like psh." And he's like, "Look, we have skyscrapers." And the mummy's like, dude, we had the pyramids." And the only thing at the end that they could say that America has that the mummy did not have in ancient Egypt is patent medicines, which is like, you know, the equivalent of it's patented medicines, like things that are sold for money. Sometimes they're considered kind of snake oil, but like imagine if you talk to a mummy today and you were like, "Well, we have Zoloft and pills for erectile dysfunction." So like that's what makes our society so different. So he's anti-progressive, he's funny. Those things get often edited out of his material in order to sell him as much as you're selling his work. Sorry, that was a really long-winded description of what's going on there. That happens a lot too in the early 20th century. So, you know, Jack London is always writing to his publisher that he wants to be marketed as a socialist, and they wanted to market him as like an adventurer, and you know, he lost. So he was really marketed as an adventurer. It's a whole thing. But did anyone else have any other questions, or any other thoughts, I guess, on Lynn's question before we move on? Okay. So I have a question that sort of builds on that, which is, when you see this funny How to Write a Blackwood article piece that breaks down the genre of the Gothic, does it make you feel differently about the genre at all? Like, does it make you take the genre less seriously? Or do you feel the same way about the Gothic?
I think this class in general has made me take the Gothic a little less seriously, and more of like, and I don't mean that like in any kind of like negative way, but it's just kind of made me, again, like unromanticize it, and kind of I don't know, almost put it in the category of like trash TV when I like to watch it because it's really entertaining and it's really sensationalized. I mean, it's really enjoyable and it doesn't like lessen the effect of it. But I don't take it as seriously, I think, as I did before.
That's the perfect analogy. I mean, that is what it was for readers of the time. It was like picking up a trashy periodical and being able to like give yourself the feeling of sensation. But the thing about the Gothic from this time period is that it has these happy endings, right? Which is something I think when we think of the word Gothic now and the way that genre evolved, we lost that like sentimental, nice bow on the end. And we're kind of, we have these, like the contemporary Gothic deals with a lot more ambiguity and like ending with those dark feelings in a way that earlier Gothics tried to neaten up. So the relationship to trashy TV is perfect. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that reading the what Poe wrote kind of was like almost a how-to manual in the sense of pulling out the elements to make it easier to spot, and that's what kind of for me made me take it less seriously because he was making it so obvious what those elements were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I really like how he talked about in it to not say what you really mean to say. Like if you want to say bread and butter, you can't really say that phrase, which makes me think, it made me think about this class also, and that like we do really close reading and we read a lot into what the authors mean, and they could just be kind of dancing around what they really mean, which just makes it kind of like a fun treasure hunt as you're reading through the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? So this is a timing question. I sort of assumed that you guys, Poe would be the name you guys knew of our readers, and I saved him till later for that reason, even though he was writing earlier than Hawthorne. Did reading it out of that chronological order seem jarring to you at all? Like, do you wish that we had read Poe before we read Hawthorne?
I think the opposite, because I think, we're so used to, or at least like probably in the general sense, we're so used to thinking of Poe as the Gothic that to get this different kind of perspective right away immediately gives us like a change in the way of thinking of Gothic. And now we can go back to the Gothic that we're used to and apply what we've learned to that, typical Gothic.
All right. Thank you for reassuring me on that point. I also like assigning Poe close to Halloween because it just feels right. So does anyone have any other questions about Poe? Thoughts, observations, favorite moments, anything?
I think one of my favorite moments is still in How to Write a Blackwood article, but it talks about put this in Latin or put this in French, because then I was like, I know a lot of poets who write this way, so it just like really made me laugh because I was like, these same like cliches of like using another language that we don't fully understand how like the way it translates into English, it still proves true today. So it just made me
I think it's funny he starts Usher that way. So he's making fun of himself, really.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's, to me, it's so interesting that and this is one of the things about genre fiction, like the point of a genre is to have recognizable elements. So a genre that you read that's supposed to have earnest emotions, like imagine if you read Wieland and then you read like that Charles Brockden Brown had written something of the equivalent of this, like you'd be like, what? Like I just read 180 pages of this like woman having this psychological breakdown because she's being tortured by this guy, and then her brother kills her whole family, and now you want me to laugh at it. Um, but but the point of a genre is really you have these elements that readers expect, and then you play with those expectations. But being able to understand what authors, or sorry, what writers, authors, writers, same thing, what readers expect, and the way that Poe does in How to Write a Blackwood article, I think is also why he's so good when he does the Gothic. So he's able to make fun of it and be tongue in cheek. But back to Lynn's question about like, how do we think Poe felt about his own writing? I feel like just because we know that he did it for money, I don't actually think that that makes it less. Like the idea that what we do for money is diminished is also a way of exploiting our labor, right? So it's like, teach because you love to teach, and it's like, well, I do love to teach, but I also expect fair pay for that work. So if you want to be a professional writer, that doesn't mean that you have to be cynical about what that means. Him knowing how to make readers laugh, but also knowing here's how you titillate a reader. Here are the when you hide your true meaning, like he's making fun of that, but it's also like, yeah, something might seem more mysterious to an American reader if it's in Latin. So it's both funny, but then also like a technique you can use. And I feel like it could be both things at the same time. Any final thoughts on Poe? So another question that I wanted to ask you, I'm going to put it in chat too. Why do you think the Gothic stayed popular even though it had started to feel formulaic? So to contextualize that question a little bit more, Poe is able to write that How to Write a Blackwood article, and it's funny to his readers because they know the Gothic and they can laugh at it too, right? That's another reason why Charles Brockden Brown, I don't really think of Brown as being particularly funny, but that's why Brown couldn't write something like that, because the Gothic was so new. So you also need familiarity with the genre in order to make fun of it. So why do you think the Gothic stayed popular even after Poe was able to make fun of it in this way?
I don't know. I kind of think of it like when you watch horror movies, whether they're like corny or not, like all of them kind of follow the same formula too, I still fall for the fear every time. Like there's always a certain amount of jump scares, like the long hallway shots where there's like you can't quite see around it. Like a lot of things I think we enjoy still have these tropes. And even though we know what's happening, it's just kind of the excitement of, well, how did this guy kind of tweak the formula to tell his story? Or like even if we think of them as like trashy novels, like okay, but like if we like reality TV, it's like okay, I know generally what's happening, but I still kind of want to keep enjoying it, like a guilty pleasure. So I think despite the fact that it is formulaic, I think lots of genres we can see the formula pretty well, maybe less overtly than Gothic, but we can still enjoy them quite a bit. Like I still like reading Gothic even after the Blackwood article, just because it's fun and it's like a little. It's a thrill, even though I know generally, okay, they're setting this up in this way. I'm excited to see exactly what might be a little different.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
I think it also, not just from the reader's end, but also from the writer's end, having this kind of formula to follow could make it easier to tell a story because you don't have to come up with your own narrative. You're just kind of filling in the template with some new plots or characters or something you want to discuss. So I think it can make the writing better as well.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think it's a genre or a formula or how you that like any author can apply to their specific time and place. Like it's not, specific to the 1850s or, early 1800s or, 1950. Like any writer can take that template and then put in their, elements of, their setting or their time. we're still seeing, filmmakers turn their, scripts into, Gothic scripts and things like that. And, so it's a very applicable genre for sure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? I think also, like we mentioned before, the Gothic itself evolves. So the Gothics that we've seen are really yoked to sentimentalism, in a way that, like, some of you in your pair chats compared Harriet Jacobs to Beloved. Beloved is definitely a Gothic novel, and it does not have a sentimentalist ending, like people aren't just married and happily ever after at the end. There are real ghosts. You don't have like the early Gothic has a little bit of a Scooby-Doo element to it, right? Where like you think there's something supernatural, but it's always not. It's always something else. And so I think some of the reason the Gothic is so resilient is that the real core of it is the dark emotions. And that appeal to dark emotions is something that is salubrious. Like, human life is stressful. And so being able to engage with a form of media or entertainment that lets you feel that stress in a really contained way. And then, it's even if it doesn't have a happy ending, you finish the book at some point and then that's done. So that core of dark emotions stays the same, but some of the other elements change and mature, really, in conversation with other literary movements that are going on. So when we talk about literary movements, we have Romanticism, which you guys are very familiar with. It's something I've talked about a lot. At the movement level, the realists come in right around the end of the Civil War, and they're like, get rid of all of this purple prose, tell the truth. That's like Henry James, who also did write a Gothic story, Turn of the Screw. William Dean Howells, Mark Twain sometimes put in that category, Edith Wharton. And then against the realists, you have the modernists who are playing with form, and they're like, you can't actually tell the truth in just a linear way with just description. You need to play. Then you have the postmodernists. But the elements of the Gothic, those dark emotions, are something that can like be reimagined for any of those movements. So you can have Henry James, who is like considered the master of realism, write a Gothic, and what he's getting at is like the reality of psychology. And you can have modernists like Faulkner write the Gothic, and he's playing with how form can change your understanding of suspense and character. And you can have postmodern Gothics too. So some of its resiliency is that the base of it is just able to be reborn with every literary movement, even though, because this is a pre-Civil War class, we only get to focus on the beginning, its relationship to sentimentalism and sensationalism, which is the earliest of American literary movements. I'm sure you guys can see just from your own experience as readers how it is reborn time and again. So does anyone have any other questions or observations as this is our last shared reading. So do you have any, I'm wondering if Poe made you think differently or kind of appreciate anything that we saw before, or if you just had sort of any overarching points that you wanted to make as we finish here.
I think talking about the dark emotions, Poe, when I read the stories we read for class, it reminded me of how in Gothic literature we take like a ride with a character, and we kind of go through those emotions with them, and it made that a lot more prevalent to me reading Poe's work.
I love that. I'm writing it down. Take a ride with the character and go through their emotions with them.
I think Poe, not just in what we read of Poe, what I've read about Poe before, does a really great job with setting and like creating a whole mood and atmosphere, which I I really appreciate. I love a good detailed setting because it really makes you feel like she's saying take a ride with the character. It's almost like you're going into the Pirates of the Caribbean at Disney and you get all of this stuff around you that helps with the feeling of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts? All right, guys. Well, do you have any questions about your assignments coming up to the end of the semester or anything?
Just to make sure I understand this correctly, the assignment for this week is not a third discussion board, but rather a Poe perusal. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, you guys just had such great feedback on the perusals that I figured that you'd find it more engaging to be able to see what everyone's saying. So I switched it up.
Very cool. Thank you.
And then the next 2 weeks, they're just tiny, I think they're 2-point just accountability assignments where I just ask you to drop me a line about what you're doing. And that's really just me being like, don't forget you have a paper due in 3 weeks. So your final papers are due in 3 weeks from now. You want to be working on them. I'm happy in those intervening 2 weeks to do one-on-one meetings. So if you're starting to write and you want to meet, let me know. I'm happy to meet with you and help you along the process. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions as they arise. I don't have anything else on my end, so if you guys don't have any other questions, we can call it an evening. All right, well, it's great to see you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Have a good rest of your week.
You too. Happy
Bye.
Halloween, everyone.
Oh, same to you.